Thank you all for being here. I'm very happy to share this moment with you. And well, I want to talk about some of the dynamics or how can we say in Mexico we have dynamic landscape and how to address them from our cultural and social perspective. I have to say that, or I would like to start from the part that landscape architecture is a discipline that we have as one of the main importance in the country, even though it's a very recent official program in Mexico. We are still very few universities that have that specialty, that course, because traditionally in the Mexican context, architects and from the 60s on, some urban designers took care of the landscape. So we are working in a multidisciplinary environment, but in a main perspective paradigm. We are not still yet in the paradigm where all professions equally have their space in the working force. So for me, it's very important to talk with you as students of this profession, because I think even though you are in a more advanced stage of collaboration, we can still learn from you a lot of ways on how to develop this mixture or this multidisciplinary approach with other disciplines. So I would like to talk about these scales and the overlapping of disciplines. Also, I will try to address how Mexican culture or Mexican environment understands landscape or the profession of landscape architects. So I would like to discuss a bit of the relationship landscape have with ecology or sustainability, and why are we now paying attention to this subject even more. Then I will try to explain a little bit how this approach to the city, to the urban landscape started, and why is maybe different from your context and how it was developed in Mexico through history. And finally, I will show you some examples, some cases of strategies I think are the best way to help Mexican cities and Mexican landscape to improve through projects, considering the main difficulties we have in this subject. So we have, for example, architecture was the main profession that was in charge, as in other parts of the world, from many centuries of developing not only buildings, but also master plans, urban design, and finally the landscape. The first photo is a house from Luis Barragan. Is our only Mexican Pritzker awarded architect. It's a house that belongs to ITESO University. It's the cultural center for us. And if you can see, that was for a certain period of time the configuration of a Mexican house and the Mexican garden in relation with interior, exterior parts. Then we have, in the second photo, we have Alcalde Street that is, recently was transformed from a very busy and not pedestrian-friendly street to a completely pedestrian project in the city center. And then we have planning. We have our city is one of the cities that have main institutions for spatial planning and development, but as you can see in the third photo, that is development, housing development. We also have areas of opportunity, because if you can see, density and not a very respectful approach to nature in the peripheral areas are causing that we suffer now from several critical issues like flooding, climate change, or warm heat waves or heat islands in the city, and so on. And finally, landscape was like a profession that now is certainly in the agenda, but in terms of relationship in the formal context, landscape architects are not still in the, they don't have mandatory participation, for example, in big projects. So that's a main issue I consider is important to address, because maybe here in Europe you have to have this partnership and multidisciplinary approach to big projects, but for us it's still optional, not mandatory. So there's a lot of things to do in that sense. So I think landscape is a very interesting way of addressing contemporary urban problems, because as many people have quoted before, if we work in urban design or architecture, we have 3 dimensions, and we basically can talk about scale, structure, function. But I think landscape also have to integrate time, because we are, as a trained architect or a trained urban designer, we tend to design in terms of a very not transformative reality. We see sometimes things in 2 or 3 dimensions, but we believe that our project will stay the same way we think at the beginning. And something I have learned from my experience in a very, very complex context is that projects are not the same. Even though you are finishing the design, the site already changed. So people, in this sense, in Mexican context, is very important, because people is very transformative of their space. So maybe we don't have this, or we have strong regulations, but people still can do and can change their environment with certain freedom. So you have to take into account how people react or will engage with the implementation of certain projects. Otherwise, even though the project can be the best in the world, it won't be a successful one. So that's what That's why I think it's important to take into account this social dimension that is very, very important, but also time, because we design in a still photograph sometimes, but we don't have the tools or methodologies to address future or change in a very flexible way. So when we are talking about huge investments, and huge, I mean for a low-income country that can be ours, or a middle-income country, these landscape or urban interventions are never cheap, always represent a huge amount of investment. So that's why we consider that having this flexibility and to being able to see how the project will transform in time, and leaving a room for people to do it by themselves, because we don't have resources to always maintaining projects. So that's a very important thing. So yesterday in class we were talking about how to address the projects, and I wanted to summarize a little bit here this approach as from the design perspective. When we are addressing a project in a dynamic context, we must first see at the big scale, the macro scale, and of course understand the elements that compose this macro scale and can be significant to transform or to they are key to develop the project. Then we have micro scale, and we have maybe another part of another scale of design when we intervene maybe with some local strategies or neighborhoods or units that are more like related with the human scale in the context of the immediate space. But and the third scale is where we question, and it can be a strong say, if master plan is the best tool to define a project. Because master plan, and you experienced in your class yesterday, can be a very still photo of what we want. And master plans generally refers to a project that is not going to be executed immediately, but it has a temporary ratio that it can be from 5, 15 or more years. So by the time you have this master plan, in the Mexican context, for example, if you do it for 15, 20 years, a lot of these things have changed. And certainly, even the designated areas for new developments probably will be already developed for people themselves or other forces of that drive the urban development. So that's why sometimes I think master plan should be, yes, it's a tool, but it shouldn't be the only tool we have to present or to develop the project. And that's where time it's incorporated, because if we could show the progression of the project in 5, 10, 15 or 30 years, it will be maybe a good communication tool for not only authorities or stakeholders, but to communities that really want to engage and support this kind of projects. Finally, as I say, I've worked with many people. I worked for the Housing Authority in my state several years, and I was in charge of an office that worked exclusively with participatory projects for housing. And for me, it was quite a challenging experience because as formal trained architect and urban designer, planner, you know that, or you tend to design from the top-down perspective. You know better what you need to do, you know the regulations, you know everything that has to be in place, but in reality, when you have this dynamic context, several things can happen and several things can be different. So, for me, it was quite a challenging experience because at that time, several years ago, like 2007, more or less, there were few initiatives in the country to try to engage people. And it's different, an effective participation, that only consultation, because we also have this this regulation that we have to consult projects and so on. But it's different when the real people who are going to use the place, you give them the tools and the chance to actually become designers and actually become some very important stakeholder agent in the developing of the project. So, well, that's the approach. So these are just sketches of what we saw yesterday. And as we see, all of them are very formal, very formal techniques, what you already know. But for me, some like this, as I explained yesterday, it's a very important thing to address, because you can understand the relationship between the territory in another way. Well, that was the first part of how is the context of design in the Mexican way when you are not in a very high profile or very high income community, but when you address problems that allow some people to involve in the problem. So then we have the perception or the meaning of landscape from in the contemporary perspective. Landscape, it's sometimes in the common knowledge, not among professionals, but from maybe officials or maybe people that has not a specific profession, they think landscape refers only to the aesthetic part of the project. So they say like that landscape may be something related to a luxury, something we made in certain period of time when we were under the French trend of design, of architecture, and we have these very controlled gardens, beautiful, but not in a free way. So landscape sometimes it's wrongly related only with the aesthetic part. Obviously it's important for a project, but for us as a strategy is not the main thing that we require to address landscape in the city or landscape in the urban context. Because, as we say, we have more limited economic possibilities, and of course, aesthetic is not in the priority of investment. So, but some people believe that this is a trend, that aesthetic is the only outcome of having landscape architects, what is completely wrong. So, also, as we can see in these pictures, for example, there was a time, of course, at the beginning of our settlements where people were applying landscape principles in regards to the foundation of the city. This is Tenochtitlan. As you can see, it was founded in a lake, and in that was the main settlement for the pre-Hispanic culture. So you have the canals, you have the pedestrian paths, you have the different zones, you have housing, then you have the main government and religious structures and so on. So, and the origin of these principles, we were really into having this relationship with nature and so on. But what changed? Today, sometimes we need to communicate even stronger that landscape in the urban space is a sustainability strategy. Because, as I explained before, it's not a trend that is obvious for everyone. And also, due to the change or through history, we have lost the ability to relate with our environment in a very natural way, like in this period. So, urban sprawl and a lot of other issues have changed the way we relate with nature. And what at the beginning was maybe a strategy to keep or preserve the green that already had in the city, now we are in the renature the city because we have ended all the natural environment we have. So what happens now in the context of Mexico in regards with sustainability? But first we have to give some scale of the scale of the challenge we have. We are now like 127 million people, more or less, and 80% of these 127 million lives in cities. So we have very few people in the countryside, and that's a problem for the balancing of cities and region, the relationship between the urban landscape with the rural landscape. Also, we have Mexico City, that is, of course, more than 20 million people, and we have other 10 cities that are bigger than 5 million. Guadalajara is one of them, Monterrey, Puebla, and so on. So cities transform very rapidly in the 50s and 60s through a process of migration from rural areas to urban areas. We are one of the most unequal countries in Latin America, and probably in the world. So the gap between rich and poor is huge. And we also are very vulnerable for climate change, sustainability, earthquakes. We have active volcanoes, flooding, and a lot of kind of natural hazards. And finally, the rural areas we still have, they are not located in points or in, they are very dispersed in the territory. So we have a huge pressure to send services and infrastructure to other places that they are very, very separated from cities, but maybe in a continuous. So these are, for example, this is a new urban settlement and this is a rural one. So sometimes differences are not that big. Well, this is one of the main cultural points in Mexico City. This is Bellas Artes Palace, the Palace of Belle Arts. And this is the place when you have concerts and so on. But as you can see, it was built in the period where we had all these European architectural trends. So also the design of the public space was related with this. So after this period, when landscape also here is Chapultepec Castle, that was a resident for or virreinal and only attempt to have like not a democracy but other ways of government, and then it became a point of this huge natural area that keeps in the center of Mexico City, and also a very important point for a symbol or independence. So this kind of landscape, and of course the Spanish heritage that we have in cities like Guanajuato, Mérida, Veracruz, that was the point of entrance of the Spanish, but after the 50s became a very important commerce, or like the port of goods, and also oil-rich region. So the building you see there is Pemex Tower, that is the main authority of regulation. So to sum up a little bit of the urban trends, in the 50s started the urbanization process. And before that, we have very centralized projects, very good public space landscape projects. But in the 50s, cities suddenly grew in a huge scale, and we started to suffer from informality. Nowadays, we can say that nearly 50% of the urban space was built in informality settlements. So people themselves built their own house, their own neighborhoods, without any planning, without any help from urban designers, architects, or landscape architects. So even though today they are not informal anymore, it's difficult to have or to address new interventions due to the characteristics of those environments. In the 50s and 60s, we have economic wealth. We were a country we had a lot of revenues from oil production, and started to have some change in the habits of people. We have more commercial goods. We have another way of living. So sustainability started to decrease in that point. And one important thing in the 80s is that at the beginning of this story of building cities, the state, through the federal government, was in charge of any project we had in the country. But in 1983 and 1989, that authority passed through the local municipality. So suddenly we required a lot of architects, urban designers, and landscape architects at that time, even though we didn't have any in the country, to develop the strategy for each city. And that's why some cities have been more successful than others in regards with this kind of projects, because some of them had these professions and some others don't. So even though they don't have these professions in place, they have to develop their own cities. And finally, in 2000 was also a critical point, because, for example, sugarcane and coffee, that are goods that Mexico exports to other countries, we had a lot of land that was destined to have this kind of crops. But in 2000, there was a crisis in the coffee price, and all regions that had this land changed the use from crops or from coffee to urban use. And that's why the extent of cities in that period exceeded any other time in the history, because land use was changed suddenly one day to another. And sometimes that still happens when we have some agricultural sites near the city, because it's better for people to sell the land with an urban use than with an agricultural one. And in that time, after 1989, also we opened the borders. We could access to foreign goods that before were not available in the country, but also we face crisis, economic crisis, and we have a massive migration from rural areas to urban areas. So that's the long story short of how we became one of the most urbanized countries in Latin America in very few decades. So when we think about the architectural scale, we can see that the garden is a very important part of the configuration of the traditional Mexican house. You can see this photo, and the garden, it's a place to have meetings, between the members of the family to enjoy, to have a good time. But you also require big plots and specific characteristics to develop this kind of architecture. Also, the Mexican traditional garden may be influenced by Spanish influence, of course, but also Arabic or Moresque structures, because we have water to cool the environment, and we have also using like trees, fruit trees, or that helps to not only with the temperature, but also they are like a source of food and so on. So in that sense, this is the house I talked about. It's from ITESO Cultural Center, and it was designed by Barragan. As you can see, we have this Moresque influence in the design. We have water, we have the colors, the types of the open areas, and that architectural configuration of the garden, of course, influenced the neighborhood configuration. So in the city, we have some areas, as you can see very clearly in the photo, like Chapalita, like Americana neighborhood, and other ones that were designed to have this relationship with the garden and the private space. So the result of the architectural trend was an urban trend, an urban configuration. And at that time, it was really nice because you had huge houses with huge plots with greenery, and the connection among all of these houses resulted in a very nice and friendly neighborhood with sustainable approach to greenery, for example. The critical point here is that this urban structure was not designed taking into account the relationship between, for example, mobility and green infrastructure as we design now, that we want to link always not motorized approach to mobility with greenery, or public space with infrastructure, like, for example, water connections. Now, as I have worked in several projects of housing. For me, it's a very important way of introducing landscape in the city, because in Mexico we still have some developments that are planned in a huge scale. Actually, in 2000, from 2000 until 2010, we have the goal to build more than 1 million houses per year, because the housing deficit in the country is still huge. And the only problem was that we thought about the architectural scale, but not the planning, not the landscape one. So we changed this. That is the first model. That is not sustainable either, because we have these huge houses that now is very expensive to maintain in a protected area, and we cannot change that into reduced units of housing. But this approach is also not friendly, because as you can see, there's a structure, you have a main road, but it's not connected directly with the rest of the urban area, so you have to go outside. And also all the greenery that we may have in this area is gone. So we are paying, or later we will have to reintroduce greenery, and in not a good quality, to have some spaces there. In that sense, I think like this model that I show you in class, that was the modernistic approach to housing, social housing, in the 40s and 50s, was a better solution for this landscape and urban massive housing problem, because you have this, you have a lot of open space, you have a lot of greenery inside, and also have these high-rise buildings. So in terms of scale, this project that is from 1947 is still functioning today, and in a good condition. So it's better that this approach to a greenery, that it really is not helping with any on the sustainability issues. This is another picture of the opposite sides of an unequal perspectives. This is the original settlers of the plot, and how through a process of corruption or renovation, now we have one of the highest income places in Mexico City. And this is another place that in terms of project, it was even awarded to with a sustainability prize, because they had like all the strategies for water and efficiency inside the house. But as you can see, the implementation was very poor, so it resulted in massive abandonment of the place. And it's not a small project, as you can see here. You have several typologies and several sections of the housing projects, but density is quite high in that place. And you also have this, the self-production of housing, that also we don't know sometimes how to integrate this to the rest of the landscape. Well, one of the main strategies Mexico has been implemented has been the urban renovation. And this is a very successful project designed by Mario Shetland, is one of Mexican landscape architects, I think is one of the most important we have. And the important thing here is that this project is in the middle of a low income community. So it was the best, well, the biggest investment government made in past years to public space, because it's a very big area, and you have this kind of spaces. There is also water canal or a water path, and the design of the spaces really is good quality. But the important thing here is that it was a project that was worked through a local office with participatory addressing with the community. And that's why, even though it has some time that has been finished, it has been very well maintained by locals, and it's a place that has a lot of visitors regularly. This is the other project in a very high income community in Mexico City, same designer, and as you can see, the quality of the space is almost the same, but here it was a project very it has a lot of comments from community, because precisely it was a huge investment in a very high income private community. So well, this is something I want to share with you. This is a book that was published by Humboldt Foundation in Colombia. And I think this scheme is really something I want to address with you, because for us it may be obvious that nature is good to approach landscape as a strategy for sustainability. It should be obvious for us, but for people it's not in the same terms. So in my country we have to build this biophilia, this feeling of engagement with this kind of projects, in order to have more local support and obviously more resources allocated to these projects. So it starts to work or realizing that I enjoy being in a better public space with a lot of greenery, and then try to drive some strategies through communication, activism, and involvement of locals in there. We also talked about the 3 dimensions we always are working on, that is material, social dimension, and symbolic dimensions. And this picture is it was taken in the photo I showed before with the abandoned settlement. And as I say, for me this is a representation of how local communities have clear knowledge of what they want and what can they achieve. So the first one is like a protest, or maybe the feeling of frustration of no knowing that what was getting into, because people pay for the houses, they had credits and they have a lot of things, but they don't got the project they wanted with greenery, good quality, public space, and so on. And then the red lines that were something that the aspirational of the place communicates. They wanted a house with the family, public space, greenery, biodiversity, and a good environment to live. So those basic needs are trying now in these recent years to be addressed mainly through public space. But that's why I believe housing and housing projects are a possibility to have more landscape strategies in the urban areas. And then we have these kind of interventions, as I showed you before. We try to reduce the cars and promote a more healthy way of circulating in the city. We also have these from Humboldt Foundation, and I think this scheme is really nice because it helped us to understand how the sum of all the strategies in individual can, for greenery, for example, can be translated in a better quality for life. I must say that Colombia in Latin America is a great example of intervention for landscape professionals, because they are working together as a normal basis and regulatory way to improve the quality of life of their cities. And also they have a very ambitious program of becoming the first country in Latin America to have biodiversity, or 30, I think, 30 cities with biodiversity approach. So it's a very, very ambitious. And this is called the Star of Death in Guadalajara. Is the place where more casualties for mobility issues have inside the city. So now they are connecting this pedestrian path through this other section and try to change the way we address public transport. But as you can see, greenery in this area is very scarce, so it requires also other kind of strategies. And this is the more recent interventions that we have in the city, some projects that are still in place or are in the future parts. As I say, everything must be in relationship with people. Here is a public protest or public gathering to demand more quality of the house in the inner city areas, and also affordability, because sometimes landscape interventions faces also that kind of not a very good public support, because they think that are responsible for the rising of prices and to avoid affordability in the inner city areas. So, to finish, I would like to say that from my experience, the dynamics of the space are always related with people. We cannot design or we cannot implement any strategy that it doesn't take into account what people feel or what people believe to be important in their life. Otherwise, projects won't be successful and will be very deteriorated in a short period of time. Then, in regards with design and communication, I think as professionals we have to invent some better tools, better methodologies to address landscape problem from the community perspective. Because even though we can understand among us, it's important to engage in the lives of people living those projects. So for me, I think the tools we are teaching and maybe implementing in our practice every day has to be developed with another perspective, another way. Sorry. Then biodiversity is a key issue now in the city landscape, because we are not very sure how to integrate that with the rest of the constructed or built areas. So I think green infrastructure, that is a topic that we are talking a lot, needs to be addressed from the community perspective and also from the biodiversity point of view. It's a pity that we had these ecosystems inside the city and we were not able to see the richness we had, and now we need to renature some of those places. So I think it's important to have this strategy also, and taking into account that the dynamics of the space are always changing. So, as I said before, projects may change, or the site might change, even though the project is not finished or is not yet implemented. So we have to take into account how to design with certain flexibility and certain possibility for change or for transformation, not from us, but from the people who lived in these environments. So I think that is all. Thank you all for being here, and if you have any question or any comment, please. Thank you.
I think, Mara, that your lecture was full of, I think, respect to several issues which we have to take into consideration as landscape architect. And for me, really, it was full of humility, and because in Poland, sometimes we have a problem with having good contact with people, because we thought, oh, they don't understand us, they don't really know what they need, and this cooperation really requires from us as landscape architect a lot of empathy also. So you are from country where people must work together because you have a lot of phenomena. You have to be patient and calm and work together. So I think that we can learn a lot about this kind of approach with respect and with empathy. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
For this lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you, students, for coming. And if you, maybe you have to go to the next lecture, or maybe someone want to ask about something. So thank you very much.
Thank you.